This episode is sponsored by Xcel Energy. Xcel Energy is dedicated to providing 100% carbon-free energy by 2050, but they can't do it alone. They need your help. Join Xcel Energy and you'll find a purpose-driven career, solid job security, and challenging work. Xcel Energy knows the value your military service brings to the workplace. It's an exciting time to be in the energy industry. Whether you're on active duty, transitioning, or already embarking on your civilian career, learn about the opportunities with one of America's leading utilities, Xcel Energy, at xcelenergy.com/military. Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri, and my goal is to challenge and support members of the military community to reach their peak potential in their civilian career and in their personal lives. Today is episode number 331, Nascar to the VA Podcast Network with Tanner Iskra.
She saw that I was taking combat camera Marines, active duty Marines, to the track every Memorial Day race, and I was just kind of running my own program. I was showing them that, hey, this is what a producer does. This is a skill set. Things that you and I never got. This is what a producer does. This is what a shooter, this is how they do it. This is an editor. You think it's an A skill set. It's actually a C skill set. Just make sure that you're aware of that in this production house. I showed them Nascar.com and all the writing teams. We went to the track. We went to the post-production tower, and then we went to the track, and I showed them all the stuff at the track. So I was doing that every Memorial Day race, and my wife saw that, and she saw the job for the VA that you could tell veteran stories. And she applied on my behalf on usajobs.gov, and she said, hey, you have an interview Monday.
After serving for 12 years in the Marine Corps, Tanner went on to work at Nascar as a producer and senior post-production editor. In this interview, we talk about how Tanner's wife led him to his current career as a podcaster and video producer for the VA. We talk about what his career was like in NASCAR and now at the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. We talk about life at the VA and, more importantly, how he now runs the podcast Borne the Battle. We talk about what he's learned in doing this podcast, as well as the VA's upcoming VA Podcast Network. As always, at beyondtheuniform.org, you'll find show notes with links to everything we discuss, as well as a text transcript thanks to Kathleen Dillon. You'll also find over 320 interviews just like this one. So with that, let's dive into my conversation with Tanner.
Dive.
Joining me today in Washington, D.C., my guest today is Tanner Iskra. Tanner, welcome to Beyond the Uniform.
Happy to be here. It's the second one I've done, so I don't think any of it have aired yet either. So this is good.
Awesome. Well, for listeners, if you're wondering why the audio quality from Tanner is so great, although he's maybe not been on other people's podcast a lot, he's done a lot of his own podcast. He works for the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, where he hosts the podcast Borne the Battle. He started out in the Marine Corps as a combat videographer, where he served for nearly 12 years. He has also worked as a producer and senior post-production editor for NASCAR. And so, and Tanner has done hundreds of episodes. And so it's great to have you on the show.
Dozens. I've only done dozens. I'm the second host of the podcast of VA's Borne the Battle. So okay. I think I started in episode 135. We're up to episode 172.
Well, you inherited quite a legacy, and from what I've seen, you're just ramping it up and doing great things with it.
Thank you.
Well, before we go into the official questions, anything that I didn't cover in the bio that you want listeners to know about your background?
I always loved my hometown of Hump Tulips, Washington. That's the actual name of the town, is Hump Tulips, population 300. Other than that, I think the bio is pretty much straightforward as far as my career.
Growing up in that environment, like, do you desire to go back to like a small town eventually? You're in the opposite of that right now in DC.
Yes, and the quick answer is yes. Someday I would love to go back. Maybe not Hump Tulips, Washington, but to a ranch with some acreage.
Yep.
Give my kids four-wheelers. My future children.
Yeah.
Now it's funny. My wife, she calls herself a prepper. And she grew up in this environment, in DC environment. And she has gotten deep into, especially when we were in Charlotte, she got deep into prepping. She's like, I'm a prepper. And I'm like, honey, you have like 2 cans of SpaghettiOs. Like, this is cute. It's not, this isn't, you're cute. You're adorable. But she really was thinking about Wyoming, Montana, So eventually I got to eventually take her out there in a December or a January in Montana or Wyoming, since she really knows what she's asking for.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, as you're saying that, I'm in Denver. I'm looking at, we had like a foot of snow dump on us overnight, and it's supposed to be like 60 or 70 tomorrow. So I'm thinking about that for my friends I'm trying to convince to move here. I'm like, you need to experience the unpredictable nature of weather here before you can commit to it.
One of my good friends that made the transition, he's in Denver. He's a former Army public affairs and combat camera, and he's in the Denver education system. So he talks about it all the time. He's like, "Oh, you got to come out," and I'm like, "Dude, I hate the Broncos. Yeah. I'm a Seattle Seahawks fan. Like, that's not going to happen."
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, maybe to start things out, walk us back. I know it's a little while ago, but when you were leaving the Marine Corps, how did you, because you left at kind of that difficult period for people around 12 years, 13 years, you start to be thinking about retirement. Walk us through how you approached that decision to get out, and then what that was like to leave after 11, 12 years of service.
Well, as everybody in the Marine Corps knows, even people that are in the military, they know the military and the Marine Corps, it's a young man's game. I was having, I was being told I had the shoulders of a 60-year-old, and I was thinking that, early arthritis was setting in, and I was thinking about, having a future child that I was gonna raise like Simba. I wanted to be able to be active for my child. So that was a main reason why I left. The other thing, as combat camera, as you become a staff sergeant, which is great leadership experience, and as you get into the staff and SEAL ranks, the skill set, you start losing some of that. And I didn't want to be the master sergeant at 20, 30 years that the corporal or the lance corporal looked at, and I'm trying to give them advice, and they're like, "You have no idea what I'm talking about." I didn't want to be that guy, and that wasn't my goal going in the Marine Corps to begin with. So, if you're not in it for the Marine Corps and for that mission, it's time to move on. Mm-hmm. So I made that decision. And everybody's like, "You're over the 10-year hump. Why don't you do the 20?" And I was like, "Look, you do 11 years in the Marine Corps and tell me you want to do another 9. And a lot of people do. And my hat's off to them. But for me, it was time to move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's one of my pet peeves too, is any sense of like, I feel like if I've been out for over 10 years, and it's like what, 99% or more of our population has never worn the uniform, has never served. And so it's like, look, anyone who raises their hand in the air and swears an oath and serves our country for a week, you're doing more than 99% of the population. So like, let's stop giving people shit about not doing 20 years. It's like, dude, yeah, anyone who did something is, yeah.
If you accomplish your goals in the military, go, have fun, go after those other goals.
Yep.
100%. Absolutely.
So you leave the Marine Corps. What is that first transition like, and what leads you to Nascar?
So I got out, I decided to get out probably a year before I actually got out. I was out in Romania. I was on what was called the Black Sea Rotation Force, and my whole career was kind of up and down, up and down, and up and down. And it was a very good upswing. And I thought, this is a good way to go out. This is it was a positive experience. Went to like 8 or 9 different countries, made about a 15-minute documentary on what's called the Marine Corps' new normal. And it was a great experience. I was like, okay, it's time to go. It's really time to go. So, I was in Camp Lejeune, and I applied everywhere, about a year out, 6 months out. And I drove from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina to Seattle, Washington. And my wife had beat me to she was kind of the advanced party. She kind of went out there first before me to set up shop and got a job and everything. And I got there at the end of my service, and I was there for about 3 weeks. And I got a call from Nascar, and they said, "Hey, we saw your resume. We saw you applied on our website." And I was like, "I did." I applied so many different places. I was like, I had no idea. And they said, "Yeah, we like your resume. We like what you're doing. We'd like to have you come out here as a senior post-production editor." And what that means is you're a colorist, and you're the final lay of the graphics before it goes to air. I didn't know that at the time. I thought it was an editor. I was like, cool, I get to tell stories. It's a great job, but just be aware of, as you get out, be aware of what the job is asking for. But it was a great experience. It's like, okay, NASCAR Productions, pretty big deal. So I was like, look, I just moved to Seattle. I just set up shop. This job's in Charlotte. if I was still in North Carolina, this would have been a great opportunity and it would take X. And they were like, here's X. And I was like, well, how could I say no? So after 3 weeks, I was like, I'm sorry, Mom. I thought, I know you thought you're getting your baby boy after 11 years, but I got to go where the job's at. So I was in Seattle for 3 weeks. My wife had to close up shop, and she's not from Washington State. She's from here in DC. And so she had to close up shop. She was in Washington State longer than I was. And I was advanced party to Charlotte, and that's where I was for the last 3.5 years until last year.
How long was your wife in Washington State before you guys moved?
I'd say probably 2 months. Oh, 2 months, month and a half, 90 days, something like that. Okay. Yeah, she was the one that was looking for the apartment. She was the one that was like having dinner with my uncle, trying to figure out the Seattle lay of the land. She did all of that. I mean, she was amazing. And then she still is. She's my rock.
I love the sense of you being honest with them about this is what it would take to get me to pick up my family and move. And I love that worked out too, that they're like, sure, here it is. And I love that you and your family, you and your wife were willing to, that would take a lot, 2 months, you're just starting to put down roots. You're close to family. You're getting excited to that life. You've kind of got your picture of what life is going to look like. And you go where the opportunity is. And that takes courage to kind of follow that, even though there was a lot of comfort in Washington there.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out how to use the GI Bill, and I was trying, this was my plan when I first got it. I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to finish my bachelor's with the GI Bill. And I was going to get an RV or something to that effect. And I was going to drive and make a mobile editing bay and go up to Vancouver every weekend and start editing films, because I thought that's how the film industry worked up in Vancouver. None of that was put into place. Thank God I only had like 3 weeks to make a different decision. So, but I think the point of that is to always be thinking of your next step. When you get out. I mean, I was thinking of this a year out. And don't be afraid to be open to new opportunities. Right.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's what came to me when you were saying that, is like, I love the nimbleness of that, of like, and I'm just imagining, nearly 12 years in the Marine Corps, like you've paid your dues, you're like ready to like have a break, and you're staying flexible, you're staying nimble, you're like moving to where the opportunity is. And that's awesome.
I moved probably every year, whether it was a barracks room or whether it was a house or an apartment. Every year in the Marine Corps, I moved. I'd moved about 10 times in 10 years. So I was used to it. If my stuff wasn't in storage still in Camp Lejeune, I'd take the option of keeping my stuff in storage for 6 months. If my stuff was in Washington State, I would have never been able to make that move. The fact that my stuff was still in that storage unit in North Carolina allowed me to go back to Charlotte. So it was just staying. And because I knew that I didn't have a full plan yet, so I had to stay flexible.
And for listeners who might be interested in, sports or media or broadcasting, what was your experience like at Nascar, being part of such a massive organization, doing the producing and senior post-production work?
I had my office, I had my edit bay, and a different producer would come in every day. So, and they would either do a half day or a full day, and it would just be, here's my piece. I need it basically prettied up. I would kind of massage it a little bit as far as pacing, if it called for that. Once I got all the graphics in, then it was time to send it to audio. While it was at audio, I would then do the color. And as audio came back, I'd marry everything up. We'd have a quick quality control session. And then it might air within the hour out at Fox News or Nascar or NBC or CBS. Wow. So I was literally the last guy to touch a video piece before it went out.
And when you say like pacing, so like you're watching the video and you're like, the story, it needs a little bit of room to breathe here, so you're going to insert some imagery to drag it out. You're like slicing it up digitally to extend it or shorten it and just make it smoother.
Yeah. And the producers there were great. I did that minimally, honestly, minimally. Yeah. But a lot of times it was picture locked, so I couldn't. But which is sometimes. But then my funnest times there were when I got a chance to storytell again. When they were like, "Here's a bunch of footage. Pick your own music. Here's the storyline we're looking for." Or when it was like the NASCAR Heat video game, I got to make some of the pieces for the actual video game. And that was kind of cool. And I got to do about one tease for the truck show. So it was the first race of the playoffs. So they were like, I got to do the opening tease for the actual broadcast. So that was pretty cool.
Was the majority of the work that you did in the Marine Corps, was it more telling the story, or was it more like the
Yes.
work? Okay. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. So, in the Marine Corps, you were a one-man band or a part of a three-man team. It was like, hey, you wrote the story, you wrote the treatment, you got it approved. You then went and shot the interviews, shot the B-roll, came back, cut the footage, got it posted, and then you actually did the marketing piece afterwards. So you kind of learned the entire process of film or video or digital production while you're in the Marine Corps. So it made me malleable, I guess you would say, in the civilian sector. I could have filled many roles.
I don't want to get ahead of us just yet, but it's awesome to think that, because it's clear you come alive when you talk about the work you did in the Marine Corps, and that the times you're able to tell a story at NASCAR. And I'm excited that you're in your wheelhouse now with podcasting. Like, you're back in the storytelling role, or at least that's the story that I have. And that's awesome that you've made your way back to that sweet spot.
One of the things I missed the most when I was at NASCAR was, and I realized this when I got there, was sitting across from somebody, asking a question, and hearing the piece that I was going to cut into my piece, and knowing that was like, okay, that is the story right there. I live for those moments, and I found that out about myself when I was at NASCAR, because I missed it so much.
What I think is great for listeners to tease out of this is, you have 3 years at NASCAR. I'm sure there's a lot of great things, but it's like, in my view, if you spend 3 years in a job and you realize, and let's just say everything else aside, the only thing that happens in those 3 years is you realize there is something missing that then empowers you to go and get that something. 3 years well spent. Like, to be open and realize, like, hey, I missed this part, I'm going to go do that next. Great. That may have been the point of those 3 years, is just to tease out that one thing that you were missing in that role.
Yeah, and I was very open about that with NASCAR when I first learned that about myself. I was like, hey, I eventually want to be a producer here. That unfortunately didn't happen. It would have been, with the way that NASCAR is structured, it would have been a difficult transition within that structure. So it was time to move on. I had hit it pretty much. It was like a Chief 1 Officer 5 position. It was like, it was a very nice position, but you're not going to get promoted beyond that. So, and go in the direction that I wanted to go into. So it was time to make the change. And I didn't make this change, to be honest with you. My wife did. She had applied on my behalf for the VA. So it was great.
That's incredible. I want to come back to that, but I'm just wondering with the, I'm just wondering or guessing, there's probably people listening that working at NASCAR in some capacity is their dream job.
Yeah.
And you're unique in that, it seems like the work that you did at NASCAR is very relevant to the work that you did in the Marine Corps. Do you think it's possible? Could someone come in cold turkey to that sort of role, or would they need to come in with a pretty deep experience in the work that you were doing?
Are you talking about technically, or are you talking about knowledge in NASCAR?
Technically more.
Technically, yep. I think you need a technical knowledge of the skill set needed for video production or for media. You need to go to school for that. You need to have a portfolio. You need to have some background in that before your stuff goes on television, or before your stuff goes to the masses, if you will. And that just takes almost a lifetime. I mean, I was in media for 9-10 years before I took that job. So it was a lot of trial and error, and not all my pieces are the best pieces. But I learned in the Marine Corps how to make better and better products, and I had a passion for it. So you need some sort of technical skill set to start that journey.
And I love this too, because like, you cultivated expertise for a decade and you leveraged that to get this incredible job at NASCAR. Where my mind starts to go is, like, it seems like a lot of what you do at the VA now is around more broadcast media, not non-video. It seems like it's more audio centric. Is that fair? Or actually, maybe tell us a little bit about your role right now.
Sure. So I got hired on as a video producer, and I started making video products, and I started doing stuff for, the Facebook and the Instagram and the YouTubes and all that stuff, doing feature products. And I still do that. I still do that from time to time. But But 90% of what I do now is podcasting. Our podcast host, Tim Lawson, started Borne the Battle. And it was before that, it was called This Week at VA. And he had did a great job. And then he had decided to move on to Arlington National Cemetery. He's still alive. He's just doing social media work for them. No, he decided to move on, and my boss called me. He's like, "Hey, I know you've been wanting to do a podcast." Because I'd mentioned that when I first joined. I was like, I've been wanting to do a podcast since 2015. Back then, the veteran podcasting space was pretty bare, and I thought there was an opportunity for that. So he goes, I know you have an interest in that. Would you like to do it? And I jumped all over it. And I said, hey, absolutely, let's do it. Because when I got to the VA, I realized that void in the space was actually being filled by Borne the Battle.
And I think that's great too, because it's leveraging part of your experience, which I'm making up the story that your experience is storytelling and editing and all of these things.
Yes.
And it's using part of that, but also open up to a whole new industry, a whole new segment. And I imagine that's also been exciting to be learning and growing in a new way.
Absolutely. And I'm actually applying things that I learned with my bachelor's degree. So when I was at Nascar, I was at night school with Arizona State University, and that's how I used my GI Bill. So I finished my bachelor's while working at NASCAR, and it was mass communications and media studies. And they made it if you look into Arizona State University, it's a very innovative way of how they use the GI Bill. You come right into the program. And a lot of the stuff that I had learned at Syracuse University that the Marine Corps sent me to transferred over really easy. So part of that mass communication and media studies is learning how to make marketing funnels and trying to figure out how to get to your audience with the media that you produce. So not only now can I, actually produce the media, I now know how to get it to the intended audience. And all that is through military training and GI Bill, 100%.
Wow. And that's so that the skill that you just described is so relevant to pretty much every company on the planet, like the ability to find who your customer is, or your audience is, and figure out how to get in front of them. I'm just trying to think if there's like a tactic that you learned that you'd want to share with listeners. I know it's kind of putting you on the spot.
No, it's fun.
Yeah.
As far as marketing?
Or the funnel, the whole funnel approach to a funnel.
So the awareness, converting them into, loyal listeners, or, from the, what's your awareness campaign? Okay. How do you get that person to actually go that next step into consuming your media and becoming a conversion, if you will? All that, I learned all that through Arizona State. And then, one of the things that I started reading in podcasting books was that, email lists are your friend. Newsletters are your friend. They're your hidden audience, if you will. And that has taken Borne the Battle into a completely new direction.
What sort of things have you done differently with the newsletter or the email lists?
Actually getting on it. So we have a newsletter that's called Vet Resources through the VA. It goes to 9 million veteran email accounts. I am on that newsletter every week.
Wow. What sort of information do you put out?
Well, the podcast is out there every week, and every 5 and 0 episode, what we have is called the benefits breakdown. I go find some office in the VA, and I'm like, all right, and I shake them. I'm like, all right, what do you do? How do you help veterans? How are they eligible for your services? And it could be anything from the home loan to the burn pit registry, which is we're looking at coming up. So it's a wide breadth of what's in the VA. The other 4 episodes fill what I call 5 tenets of the podcast. One, you have to let me look those up, because I forget all the time.
And I'm going to, for listeners at beyondtheuniform.org, I'll add a link to where you can sign up for the Vet Resources email list, as well as Borne the Battle podcast.
Perfect. 1 is bridging the military-civilian divide. 2, educating VA employees about the warriors they serve. 3, promoting veteran advocacy initiatives through the voice of veterans. 4, inspiring and educating transitioning veterans with positive stories. And 5, informing veteran listeners about new information from the VA as it is released. So the other 4 episodes and the other content goes into those 5 tenets. So if you fit those 5 somewhere, if you fit a couple of those 5 tenets, you're more than welcome to come on the show. The other stuff that comes out in that newsletter are vet resources that are professionals find. It could be like a free meal on Veterans Day. It could be a nonprofit that is providing a certain service for veterans that maybe the VA doesn't provide. There's all kinds of resources in that newsletter.
That's great. I love to, were those tenets in place before you joined the podcast, or was that?
No.
Okay. What I love about that, and I don't have that for Beyond the Uniform. I think that's great. I'm a big advocate of these filters, right? Like I imagine it took time to come up with these tenets and define them. And you're essentially figuring out who you are and who you're not.
Yeah.
And now that you've done that heavy lifting, now it's pretty easy to say yes to things and no to things. It just makes everything more efficient. And listeners can apply that on anything. You could do that as your tenets for your family, for your job search, for whatever else. Once you identify those values, everything else is incrementally easier.
It helped me explain what Borne the Battle was about.
Mm-hmm.
When I first came into the podcast, I was like, cool, I got a podcast. Now what? And how do I explain this to people, what I'm trying to do? I came back and I just went back to the military. I just went back to like a mission statement, what's the mission of the podcast? So that's kind of how I came up with that.
That's great. That's great. Anything you'd like to share about the podcast, what you've learned along the way, or what it's been like doing this new form of media?
I've had a great time. I love it. I love talking to people and get paid to talking to people and learning from other veterans. This whole podcast for me is a complete journey back into the veteran space. When I left the government, when I left the Marine Corps, I mean, I'm telling you, I left it. I went straight into sports media and didn't look back. I was like, I'm never going to join the government. I'm never going to do anything government again. So this whole podcast is a journey back into, for me, even just learning about the VA and what they do. So.
And let's rewind just a little bit. What was it like? So your wife came to you. She's like, hey, by the way, I'd actually submitted your application to the VA and you have a job interview. What was that like?
Not even that. She was like, hey, your interview's on Monday. So she saw that I was taking combat camera Marines, active duty Marines, to the track every Memorial Day race. And I was just kind of running my own program. I was showing them that, hey, this is what a producer does. This is a skill set. Things that you and I never got. This is what a producer does. This is what a shooter, this is how they do it. This is an editor. You think it's an A skill set. It's actually a C skill set. Just make sure that you're aware of that in this production house. I showed them Nascar.com and all the writing teams. We went to the track. We went to the post-production tower, and then we went to the track, and I showed them all the stuff at the track. So I was doing that every Memorial Day race, and my wife saw that, and she saw the job for the VA that you could tell veteran stories. And she applied on my behalf on usajobs.gov, and she said, hey, you have an interview Monday.
This woman, between her picking up and moving Washington and this, she deserves a medal. That you found yourself a good spouse, man. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So I did absolutely. 100%. So I did the interview in my truck with my current director and during the lunch break, and was hired on 3 months later. So no, if it weren't for my wife, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have been as successful in the Marine Corps as I was. I wouldn't have been as successful in civilian world as I am, because it's all because of her.
And what I love about this for listeners is so I'll posit this, and I'm open to your saying it's not true, but it's like my guess is you probably didn't put the pieces together about like the enjoyment you had bringing these veterans to the track and showing these things. And your wife, she's seen this in you. She's seen like, hey, this lights him up. There's something about this. Therefore, this job might be a good fit. And I just say that as a theory for listeners, whether you have a spouse or just friends, like they might see things in you. They might see things about the way that you talk about things or the things that you do that energize you. They may have insights about career paths that you might not even consider.
Oh, 100%. Always look to everyone to your left and to your right around you for guidance, for support. Like I said, I'm the dreamer and my wife is the ladder builder. And that's just how our relationship has always been for the past 15 years. So, and I don't see it changing anytime soon. I will always be the dreamer and she will always be the ladder builder.
That's great. I'm writing that down. That's a great quote. What about, how have you liked the work at VA? Like for listeners who may want to work at the VA, what are some things you like or maybe dislike, just to give them a sense of what life is like there?
I love working at the VA. I really do. I get to talk to veterans. I get to learn about veterans. I get to help highlight veteran issues, veteran information. I get to highlight information from the VA to veterans. I get to help make that, because I think there's a lot of services, but I think a lot of the times you don't get to hear about it, you don't learn about it, or you don't know the process. I get to help explain that. There's I think, it's just like any other, as far as the least part aspects of it, I would say the gear, just like any other government organization. At NASCAR, I loved hitting the render button and watching it just zoom right across. I kind of giggled, coming from the Marine Corps. Now the gear is government issue. But what we make do, we're Marines. But I get to help veterans. I mean, a lot of people that have may say this or that about the VA. I get a chance to actually affect change, and there's a lot of veterans in the VA. And so, if people say anything about the VA, you're talking about probably 80% of the workforce is veterans. Hey, they're working there. They feel the same way I feel. They want to help their brothers and sisters. So no, I love working at it. There's plenty of jobs open. There's plenty of jobs open within the VA. So no, I enjoy my time at the VA, and I love what I do. I really do.
That's awesome. What's a typical day look like for you?
Well, I think in podcasting, you have to have it structured by day in order to get the podcast out on time. So Mondays is blog writing, graphics creation. Tuesdays is actually producing the podcast. Wednesdays is when it posts. And this workflow might change here pretty soon based on new policies. Thursday is my coordination and booking interviews. Fridays is actually cutting down the next week's interview. So I'm always doing something with the podcast every day of the week. And then I do interview. I actually conduct interviews on Wednesdays and Fridays as well. So it's a pretty full slate when it comes to the podcast. That's pretty much the workflow, and that takes about 90% of my time.
That's awesome. And we chatted before the interview. I can edit this out if you're not allowed to talk about it yet. But you've got a big expansion coming in the new year. Is that something you're able to talk about?
It is. We have 2 podcasts, what I would like to say, in beta. Recently, we decided to create a VA podcast network. And I'm looking at bringing those 2 on at the beginning of the year. We have another podcast in production, and probably 2 that are in ideation. So we're looking at having about 5 or 6 podcast shows from the VA, and these focus on, of course, you have Borne the Battle. That's your flagship. There's one on research. There's one on suicide prevention. Those are your 2 betas, and then there's another one that's going to be called Our Grateful Nation, and that is people that have never served but still feel like they feel like serving veterans, and they have some really great guests for that show that have already been produced. So yeah, at least 3 shows. We're looking at doing that at the beginning of the year.
That's great. So for listeners, keep an eye out for that, and I'll have a link to the Borne the Battle podcast. But when those come out in the new year, we'll circle back with listeners and let them know. I think that's great to just kind of deploy this vehicle to address each of those pain points. And I particularly like that one about the last one you said, where it's kind of like spotlighting the people who didn't serve in the military and yet are serving the military community in such powerful ways.
There's plenty of them. Part of the Borne the Battles thing is it's from the veteran perspective. And what I was finding was, hey, you're doing great things, like a Gary Sinise type or Kurt Busch, who's like just giving away NASCAR tickets right now. You're doing great things for veterans. You're not a veteran. It doesn't really fit Borne the Battle. I get a lot of reviews that say they like that it's from the veteran perspective. Let's find a vehicle. Let's figure out a vehicle so we can talk about it, and we can actually get that information out there, and so veterans can take advantage of either some resources that are out there.
That's great. I think that's a great example for listeners too of this could apply to any career path, but you've got this feedback loop. You're looking at the reviews, you're noticing this trend of like, oh, people like this, but there's also this other need, and you create a completely new structure that's going to serve more people. That's great that you were open to that feedback and you acted on it.
It's important as a media creator to listen to your audience. I mean, they're the ones that are right. It ain't you or me. Mm-hmm. They're the ones that are consuming your media, and they're going to tell you what they want. So it's extremely important to listen to your audience as a content creator, as a social media manager. If you work in media whatsoever, listen to your audience.
That's great. I know it's not good to have favorites, but do any favorite interviews stick out so far?
I have enjoyed talking to everybody that I have talked with, and I have learned something from everybody. Like I'm sure you have too. But man, one goal was to get Dale Dye on the podcast, and we did. That was a recent one for the Marine Corps birthday. And then there was Dr. John Baxter on our 9/11 episode. It's a story that really has not been told. Before any, he was at the Pentagon on 9/11. He was the flight surgeon for the Secretary of Defense. And before any helicopter came, before any first responder came, he led the evacuation of the Pentagon. And he gave a very, very detailed account of that. And, I sat down for that one. It was an in-person interview, and we went through that entire day. And that is something I'll never forget. And then, of course, my mentor, Rick Robinson, he was my very first interview. I got to tell his story. Emmy Award-winning cinematographer up at Headquarters Marine Corps right now. I learned so much from him technically, and to be able to tell his story. I mean, he had been a videographer for Michael Jackson, been on films like, I don't know, Back to the Future Part 2, was on the Dangerous Tour with Paul McCartney, Whitney Houston. I mean, he had so many great stories growing up, and through the Marine Corps, I got to listen to them all. And then I got to, now with this podcast, I got to share them all. And then I would say from a benefits breakdown perspective, Ursula Draper and the assistive technology program talked about how they're basically making superheroes out of veterans with polytrauma. They're basically, they can move wheelchairs with their eyes. They're doing 3D printing to allow veterans with polytrauma, have their limbs again almost. There's a lot of really great things in that episode that she talked about that I think veterans will take away from. And I'm going to say one more because it just popped in my brain. Nathan Goncalves, from a conversation perspective, was the greatest I think the best flow of a conversation. We connected really. We were both post 9/11 vets. We both connected really well, and he had a shot at doing corporate law and making millions of dollars, and then he had a divorce, and he took that experience and realized that there was no veteran advocacy for maybe someone that had PTSD in the service and it was used against them in their divorce. So he shunned away an entire corporate law career to focus on family law for nonprofit. And it was just, that's an incredible episode as well.
This is awesome. And for listeners, I'll add links to Dale Dye, Dr. John Baxter, Rick Robinson, Ursula Draper, Nathan Gunn, because I wrote that down. I don't have that incredible memory, but I'll add them in the show notes so listeners can check them out. That'll be a good way for them to introduce to the show. That's
great. Thank you. That's great.
One other thing I wanted to ask is any recommended resources, and that could be books or podcasts or movies or websites, or you've already called out the education program you went through. I think was that Arizona
State University.
Arizona State.
Yep. Conquest School of Journalism, highly rated journalism school in the country. Of course, there's Syracuse University. When I was still in Newhouse School of Journalism, again, a top 3 journalism school in the country. For podcasting, there's 2 books I read. One is Podcast Domination, and they're both about 100 pages or thinner. Really easy reads. One was called Podcast Domination: Launch, Grow, and Monetize Your Podcast by Mark Gubernetti. I am butchering his name right now. And then 100 Great Podcasting Tips from 100 Great Podcasters. Both are really thin, really easy to read books, and my wife got them for me as soon as I took the gig. I'm telling you, everything comes back to my wife.
We need a donate button on this episode for people to donate to get flowers for your wife. She's gone above and beyond. Podcast Domination, 100 Great Podcast Tips from 100 Great Podcasters. I'll have those in the show notes too.
Great.
Awesome. Well, I always like to leave the last question open-ended, and you can take that either as what have we not covered that you really want listeners to know, or what are some final words of wisdom you'd like to leave with listeners?
Transition is really tough for a lot of veterans. And even though I would like to think that I had a pretty successful transition, it wasn't without stress. So, if there's somebody that is going through a transition right now and man, do whatever you can to help them, because some people need that support, do what you can. And if you're going through that transition and you keep running into roadblocks, man, don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. You learn perseverance in the military. Don't and use that. And, you know, if you have combat related illnesses, talk about it. Every interview that I've had that has had combat experience and that has worked through combat experience, they always reference that talking about it, getting it out, not letting it eat you up, has been cathartic. You know, writing it down, talking to somebody that's been there, just getting it out is so much better for your soul than just keeping it in. So if you're going through that right now, get it out, man. Get it out.
Well, Tanner, this is awesome. I appreciate your advice. I appreciate your sharing our story with Beyond the Uniform. And I greatly appreciate the work you're doing at the VA and the impact that you are even expanding in this year ahead to help out so many men and women who deserve that support. So thank you for all of that. Surface. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Quick couple admin points. We release brand new episodes every single Monday and Thursday. Those are usually recorded about a month or so before they go live. Every Monday and Thursday, we have an interview, usually almost always with a military veteran about their civilian career. More and more, we're starting to add in experts who may not be veterans, but may have some expertise that will help the military veteran community. Saturdays, I typically post more of a behind the scenes episode, which is a free form format. I try to use what I'm calling a mullet format. And by that, I mean business up front, party in the back, talking through admin points, professional topics related to the podcast. It might be a conversation I had that week. It might have been an interview I had that week, but just trying to share things that are top of mind that may help you in more of a free form, straight from the heart format. And then the party in the back is the personal side of things, just kind of more free flowing thoughts on life, on improving oneself, just kind of whatever's going on in life and trying to be authentic and honest about those things as well. Special thanks. We have an all volunteer army of people behind Beyond the Uniform making this possible. We do this on our lunch breaks, on our evenings, on our weekends, because we love the military community. We want to give back. We want to make a difference. We want that as part of the purpose in our life that we valued in the military. So special thanks to Steve Bain. Steve does pretty much everything. He helps secure guests. He does our newsletter. He keeps the reels rolling and keeps me sane. Kathleen Dillon, the first person to join our team. She writes text transcripts of every single episode. It's wild. She keeps up with 2 of these a week despite a demanding career and education right now. But those transcripts help us get more SEO value, helps her audience more. Andrew Woolridge is our data guru. He helps us understand the numbers, which is the easiest way for us to figure out how we can better support you, and adds kind of the data oversight for that. Rick Healy does all of our social media. He is gaining more and more of an audience for us by getting our videos, getting our podcasts out on social channels. The best way to stay in contact with us is if you go to beyondtheuniform.org, there is a newsletter. You'll have a little pop-up that comes up. You can put your email in. We email twice per month. We try to be respectful, but it is a great way to get appraised of upcoming events, upcoming interviews, promos where companies are giving discounts to Beyond the Uniform listeners, and more. This does cost money to put on. We are committed to not charging veterans directly, and the way that we kind of offset costs is through corporate sponsors. So if you know of a company that would like to get in front of a military audience and their families, that's one way that we can both add value to our members, but also offset the costs of Beyond the Uniform and give us a little bit of budget to start expanding what we're doing. So that's the best way you can help us. If that's not something that you can do, a positive review on iTunes is greatly appreciated. Have a wonderful week. We will be back Monday, Thursday, and Saturday with more interviews. And keep up the listening. Take care.